Okay, so but it's the same organization. Okay, we're going back. Never mind, we're going back.
Welcome to the next talk for the Varia track. After a very practical 25 minutes of coding and using different microservices and data services, I would like to welcome Ben Herzberg for the next talk. Ben, you are a chief scientist at Satori, and you're going to talk today more about DataSecOps, basically data ops with a bit of security in between. And I'm looking forward to learn why I should care in this case. Ben, take the stage. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And not a little bit, but a lot of security, and that's actually a great starter for the talk. So let me just share my slides. And first of all, I'm very happy to be in my home, but virtually in the conference. A little bit about myself before we begin with this topic. So my name is Ben Herzberg. I'm chief scientist for Satori. The company basically simplifies data access to organizations. Before that, I was leading research for Imperva, which is a leader in application security. Before that, I was CTO of a company around cybersecurity as well, endpoint security, and before that, I was doing offensive security. So basically, my background is from the offensive security, development of security products, research, security research. That's where I come from. I have 3 children. I'm from Tel Aviv, Israel. And I really like to travel. Before COVID, I liked to travel. I used to do that quite often. But now, next month, I'm starting to travel again, going to the US and then to Ireland. So it's fun to see that I can travel again. And also, I put this so I don't forget. Also, next month, I'm publishing a book with my colleague Yoav Cohen, a book about Snowflake security, Snowflake as in the data cloud security, my first book. So that's very exciting for me as well. So after talking about me so much, we're going to talk about DataSecOps today, which is a fairly new concept. Though, as we will see, it's very natural. It's a natural evolution in this space. So we're going to speak about DataSecOps, and I wanted to start with a quick definition because it's a new concept, and we will go back to this definition again once we understand more about the background of DataSecOps. But basically, it's an agile, holistic, security-embedded approach to coordination of the ever-changing data and its users, aimed at delivering quick data to value while keeping data private, safe, and well-governed. And I want to come back to this slide in the end of this talk, so we can hopefully get some more understanding about the definition and why it matters and the mindset around DataSecOps. So what are we going to do today? Today, which is also, by the way, my birthday, so that's always fun doing a talk on my birthday. So today we're going to talk about DevOps and the move of applications to the DevOps world, and what we're doing, and then the move from DevOps to DevSecOps, because it's very relevant to what's happening in data operations as well. Then we're going to talk a little bit about data democratization and data operations, data ops, and then we're going to come back and wrap it up with DataSecOps, the mindset around DataSecOps, and the principles around DataSecOps, and TWB AGSI, which is, this would be a great session if you learn more about DataSecOps, which is a new concept, and its principles, hopefully get into the mindset of starting to adapt to that in your organization and add those principles in your organization. Start thinking around that, or start progressing around that. So let's first talk about DevOps and the move from the old ways of software development lifecycle to DevOps. I used to play part in the old days as well. I think that first of all, one of the main drivers that brought application delivery to the DevOps world was, of course, cloud elasticity, the ability that you can span resources quick in the cloud, and you can make iterations quick and innovate faster. That was a game changer, of course, in the world of software development. Before that, you had cadences of software release. You would create an application, any software, and mostly it would new versions would come out every quarter, every year, and then you would have a time slot in enterprise software, for example, like a code freeze, where it goes through security testing, and it would be a week or two, or depending on the project. But in that time, it would go through extensive testing, which of course would not promise you that there wouldn't be any security vulnerabilities, but there was a there was a process that was very regular, that you would stop. For example, a bank wants to publish a new application, then there's a week to check everything and go through penetration testing and everything, and make sure that the product is then fixed, and by the time it goes through security testing. And with the ability to work in very quick iterations, sometimes more than once a day. Just forgot to turn the volume off. So working in quick iterations in software development, in application development, being able to push things continuously poses security challenges, because in the DevOps world, it's a continuous loop of planning, creating the new features, verifying that they're working with automation testing, then packaging it for releasing it, and configuring, monitoring, and it goes, it's continuous. It goes back to the new features, and there's no time in this continuous process. You can't say, okay, so if we deploy twice a day, then we will have a security break for 2 hours between those releases. So security had to change and adapt as well. So some of the common security issues around application development, and we will soon see how this relates to DataOps as well. First of all, in many organizations, the move to DevOps meant that the organization would have a DevOps team. There was a DevOps engineer and a DevOps manager and a DevOps team that would be responsible of taking the packages from the people who write the software, the application developers, and the application teams, and move it to production. And it's their responsibility to be in charge of that DevOps process, to make sure that everything is reliable and available, and everything is deployed and still works. And this was one of the problems. This concept that the DevOps means the DevOps team, while the application team still remains with their old mindset of, if there are any security issues, they will be found along the way by the people who are in charge of security. I'm a developer, not a security person, not a security expert, and my goal is to write code that works, and that was a big problem because vulnerabilities were introduced in these quick iterations. A lot of issues around misconfigurations and change management when deploying software, like not having the stage environment configured exactly like the production environment, and things that do not work. So you give too much permissions. For example, you open buckets to too many people, like the entire public, and things that did not transform well from the staging environment to production environment. So that was also a common security issue in this learning curve of moving to DevOps, and the cost of security as a patch, of adding security along the way, can be very high. It's not like there's a stop at the end of the version development and you can then say, okay, so we're not releasing, because it's continuous, because it happens frequently. This can't happen. So the mindset was changed, and security has to be bolted in the process, hence DevSecOps. It's in the middle, it's a first-class citizen. It's bolting security as a first-class citizen, not adding a little bit of security. That's very important. So the process changed. Security is embedded into the process. Like I said, it's bolted, and it means that security teams need to be part of the team, part of the team, either adding security champions to the team, or being part of the design throughout to monitoring. Security can't be a disabler sitting at the end of the process saying, okay, this does not work, because it can't work with something that's continuous, like what data is becoming. And shift to the left, some of the security responsibility has to move to the left or to the developers. And by adding security automations, for example, that make sure that your build fails or your commit fails if it did not go through security testing, and of course security training, and making sure that developers are at least familiar with the concepts of security and are able to write a more secure code, because that's what you have to do when everything is. So basically, security does not oversee, it's part of the entire process. It should sit in the same room when the design of project is made, and it should be a first-class citizen, like I said. So that was about DevOps and applications move to the cloud. And the reason why it's very relevant is because applications through this revolution slightly before data is going through this revolution. And when I mean data, I don't mean the data that is tightly connected with the applications, like the transactional databases that are part of the application that is being deployed with the application. What I mean is mainly analytical data, and the data that is used mainly by the organization itself, by the data analysts, data scientists, and various teams to make value out of data. And so moving to data, I want to talk a little bit about data democratization. So in the famous words of Winston Churchill, who said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others, I would like to say that data democracy is the worst form of data governance, except for all the others. Data democracy being, in a TLDR, being the ability of more people from the organization to make use of data, and to lower the entry barrier of people from different teams of using data. and why I think that they, which is an unpopular opinion, of course, but why I think it's bad, coming from the security space and being a paranoid security person. So first of all, data is not just a big value; it's also a big liability. So it's not just the new oil or new water or all these sayings. It's also the new oil, as in if it leaks, it creates an environmental disaster or a disaster for the company. Data is a big liability, and by giving access to more people in the organization to data, you increase the risk. Um, that is, of course, unless you take countermeasures, which we will talk about later. But data is a big liability. Having data about 1 million users can be, or 100 million users, can be a great asset, as it can make you the next unicorn, but it can also be digging your grave. Data is a big liability. And by opening access to a lot of people to the data so they can make value out of it, you have increased risks. This is slightly different than the DevOps revolution or evolution that we were discussing earlier, because now there are more data protection and privacy regulations, and some of them are stepping into more practical phases, like lawsuits, and so there is a cost of enabling more people to access data. It's also a strain on compliance. It's also, there's a cost in compliance. For example, if you need to, as part of an audit or as part of being compliant with a certain framework, you need to deliver a map of where your sensitive data is, or who is accessing your sensitive data, who has access, and who is actually using this access to access sensitive data. The more people you have that are able to access the data, the worse you are, in terms of the more you need to work to make it to make this reporting, which is not always straightforward, right? Organizations has, in many cases, many different data platforms. Knowing where your sensitive data is not trivial. Knowing who has access to it is non-trivial. And this is an example. There are other similar issues as well. And it's also an operational challenge, of course. It's easier to open data to one BI team than opening it to customer success, sales, marketing, and different engineering teams, etc., etc. So it's also an operational challenge. I'm saying why data democratization is bad, but but at the same time, data democratization is a must. Okay, and let's discuss why it's good. But it's very important to understand that this is not just a flip switch, like a switch that you turn on, and once you enable everybody with access to data, everything is good. So first of all, it makes more people within the organization make use of data in novel ways. So, for example, people who knows their domain, for example, customer success, who knows their domain, can work with the data and understand who are the top 100 customers they should contact in order to increase renewals. So that's a much leaner process, a much more efficient process than them having to explain something to a different team and only they can touch the data, and things are always lost in the translation. So this is one thing. It shortens the time to value. It also takes away time that that they can immediately start working on data, and in in a modern architecture of a data lakehouse or a cloud data warehouse or a data lake, they can have almost real-time data to analyze and make decisions on. And this means basically making value faster, and it's crucial for the business. So basically, at the end, there's a lot of business value in that more people can be equipped with the weapon of being able to analyze data, and because of the technology advancements around data that happened in the last few years or the last decade or so, that made it very easy both to make BI out of data and also make predictions and machine learning and classifications and such with BI tools moving to the cloud and becoming more simple and very streamlined and easy to make insights of the data, and with machine learning studios and packages and libraries that are very easy and simple and can make this happen for more people than just the data scientist, the hardcore data scientist, or the hardcore data analyst. So again, data, it's important to understand the balance. Data is a liability, but it's also a big data asset. So eventually, about data democratization, basically the move from reporting, like what happened, to BI, to what is happening, to predictive analytics, requires the use of massive data, and the best way is by the people who understand their domain as well. The cloud and new technology as enablers, you can span up new data stores and new BI tools and analyze, and then shut them down when you don't need them, and you can so the same things that drove software development to innovation, you can make use of those for analytics as well. And basically the simplicity or the ease of use, where you can write simple Python scripts, or you can use codeless environments to make value from data. It brings power to the masses. Not only data engineers, data analysts, and data scientists can touch the data, but also customer success, marketing, and various other teams in the organizations. So at the end, it's money, okay? It's making the business profitable. Your competition is trying to make the most of their data, so you want to make the most of your data. If you're selling shoes and your competition knows how to suggest the accompanying product and accessories in the best way that gives them extra few percentages of conversion, and you're not, then you're losing money. And that's just a simple example. But again, if you're an enterprise, a SaaS enterprise, and you're losing customers because your competition knows which customers they need to call first and you don't, then basically you can be losing a lot of money. So enabling data ops and enabling data democratization is often considered to be part of the role of data ops. In the word of Gartner, which is a bit of a long description, but it's very intuitive. Data ops is the collaborative data management practice focused on improving the communication, integration, and automation of data flows between data managers and data consumers across the organization. Now, notice that this speaks a lot about people as well, about the communication between people. There are the data producers and the data consumers, and the data flows within the organization those people constantly change. Like a data scientist now needs access to a project to make value, and the data keeps on changing as well. And data ops is basically making this harmony work across the organization. So a short description is it's an agile coordination of the ever-changing data. The data keeps changing, and its users. The users keeps changing. The data consumers, you're a data consumer for one data set, but then you're a data producer of a different data set. Data is being copied and enriched and changed. So this is basically data ops making all of this work, so people can make use of the data. A couple of differences before we go to DataSecOps. A couple of differences between DevOps and DataOps. Okay. Because there are, of course, the obvious similarities that you should notice when discussing this, but some of the differences are the following, and this needs to be in your mindset when you want to go DataSecOps. First of all, data ops, or the analytical data in the organization, it usually means broader teams or more teams are involved in this project. In DevOps or in the software development and software deployment, there is usually the people who make the software and test it, etc., the engineering teams, then the DevOps, which is also mostly part of engineering, and those are mainly technical teams as well. And and in data ops, there are a lot of business users as well who are not as technical. People from marketing, from sales, from other parts of the organization. So that's one difference that's important to understand. Again, due to the increase of regulation and there are a lot of data protection and the privacy acts and the compliance frameworks and such, there is a large emphasis on these and the requirements that they entail your organization, and it's also mostly less mature in organizations. What do I mean by mostly less mature? I don't want to insult anyone, of course, but after speaking with a lot of data engineering organizations, there are certain things that are out there that I don't think that a lot of companies in software development are doing in the software part, and this needs to change as part of the maturity of these organizations. And for example, there are organizations where you see, for example, someone wants to make tests or analytics around a users table, so they just do a copy table and copy the users table to users 2 or a user stamp or something like that, and they make some sort of anonymization on that table. Sometimes they don't, and then they run their tests on this table, and while still in the same data warehouse in production, and it's not something that's ideal in terms of separation of environments. As an example, another example is that many companies in their data operations don't have a solid staging environment and production environment setting, and so when you're doing configuration changes, for example, when you're changing views that are part of the data operations lifecycle to enable access to certain parts of the data, someone just changes the view, or maybe they're doing testing internally and that's it. Sometimes I've seen data engineering teams that are using ad hoc Python scripts that are not properly maintained, sometimes not even in code repositories. And these things are more uncommon in application in DevOps than in DataOps. I think mainly because of the maturity, because it exists for, like the applications moved faster to the cloud, or earlier to the cloud, not faster. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about DataSecOps and what does that mean. So I'm saying that DataSecOps is the real enabler of data democratization, because there are saying like DataOps is the enabler of data democratization, the ability to coordinate data operations across from data producers to data consumers with the changing data. And I'm saying that without security, and security in the broad sense of also governance and privacy, without and compliance, without having that bolted into your data projects and your data processes, you're not a real enabler of data democratization, because you're either increasing your risks. I've seen organizations where data access is, they've given up, and data access is mostly anyone or a lot of people are getting a sysadmin account or role for a data warehouse, and because they are sick and tired of enabling access in a granular way. And engineers are sick and tired of becoming, rubber stamps that gets tickets and gives access to data. And if you've given up on that, or if you've given up on the other side of, you're enabling data access after a very long and tedious process, where by the time you as a data scientist need the data, you're not, it's no longer relevant, then DataSecOps needs to be, it is the enabler of data democratization in the right way. So what is the mindset of DataSecOps? Like, what do you need to keep in mind for proper DataSecOps? First of all, is that there is no way around it. More data consumers means a higher data exposure risk and various other risks like compliance risks. And you need to find the countermeasures for that. But you can't just ignore the truth, okay? You can't just open access to anyone who wants access to the data and figure out that everything is good. So it means higher data exposure risks, and part of the countermeasures are implementing security control that should be as automated as possible, like dynamic data masking and so on. And row level security, that's automated processes. Like if I'm from Germany, then I can only view data of Germany out of the box, and so at least my exposure is limited. As an example, of course, right? Not only regional data settings, but for example, if I'm not in a certain role or group, I will always get PII masked, no matter what I'm trying to access. And if I need something more than that, then at least I've filtered out most of the problem. Something important to understand is that small teams are handling a lot of data and data changes. Why is this important to understand? It's, lean data engineering teams are handling massive amounts of data and massive amounts of changes to data and to people who access the data. So why is this important to understand for the mindset of DataSecOps? It's because with limited resources and growing data needs, you need to do processes that are as automated and as continuous as possible, versus projects that takes some months, some time, accounting to months of time. So The most important thing is that the operation, like the DataSecOps data enablement in the organization, it shouldn't significantly slow time to value, because otherwise you're losing business, but it shouldn't compromise on security. So you need to have the clear security policies and processes and have everything continuous and as automated as possible to still make it work with these two contradictions. And basically, it's holistic. It's about everybody that's touching the data, which is in many cases most of the organization. And it must be collaborative. Security can't be like out of the room, but then when the data project is over, they come back and say, but this is contradicting to our policies. They need to be part of the design and part of the continuous process, and it needs to be not specific to a team. DataSecOps is not a data engineering sport; it's everybody's sport. And some of the principles, or the principles of DataSecOps are, and remember, it's a new thing, so it will probably change over time, but security needs to be a continuous part of data operations, right? It shouldn't be at the start of the project and the end of the project, or only at the end of the project, or only coming once a year or once a quarter or once a month to do an audit. It needs to be part of that and not an afterthought. It needs to be, the policies should be very clear and defined, and security needs to fully own this, to be fully part of the process. Anytime there's something ad hoc, there should be a strike through on the ad hoc. Always prefer processes that are continuous over processes that are ad hoc. For example, if I need to find the sensitive data in my organization, I can't do it once a year or once a quarter. The data moves all the time. I need to find the way to make sure that I know about sensitive data continuously. And this is just an example, of course. There are many other examples, but it needs to be continuous. I was mentioning this before when I was saying about some of the immaturity, that we need to ramp up our maturity, and that's separation of environments, testing, automation, like proper engineering, like a secure software development lifecycle needs to apply to data as well. And when you're making changes, for example, in data access, just altering a view in production seems, for example, beyond the line of what's risky versus how you should act. Another thing, because we mentioned that there are few resources relatively in data engineering and security, and a growing amount of data and data users, prioritization is key. Although in an ideal world, everything should be under control and everything needs to get 100% resources, that's not often the truth. So you need to focus on sensitive data. You need to map where your sensitive data is. You need to know where it is. You need to know who owns it, and you need to act upon it. Which brings me to data which should be clearly owned, and this may be part of the maturity issue. But having a cloud data warehouse in production, where one of the databases or even tables in the database, no one knows what they have in them and who owns them, and or who owns them. This needs to be very clear, right? Because otherwise you don't know really the amount of risk you are in. And last but not least, data access should be simplified as much as possible, of course, because in many cases there are conditions that makes it harder to do so. But it should be as simplified as possible. It can be complicated, but not complex, right? So it can be that If I'm from Germany, for example, I can only access data that is of German customers or German employees. And I can only access finance data because I'm in finance. So it can have complications, but it needs to be clear. And it also needs to be deterministic. For example, if Ben is a data scientist and Ben wants to access a certain data set, Ben needs to get the same reply regardless of the day of the week and whoever answered the ticket. Okay? So the data access processes also needs to be very clear and deterministic, which is not always the case. Getting back to DataSecOps, and then we'll move to questions. So it's agile. It's with shorter tasks, a lot of moving parts and things that are changing fast. Holistic, as in the entire organization or the entire data stakeholders needs to be part of this. DataSecOps need to have this mindset of how important it is. Security needs to be embedded, part of the project, of the process, not like an afterthought. And comes to protect is the ever-changing data and the ever-changing data users or data stakeholders in the organization. And the main things it needs to keep in balance is the quick time to value versus or with security, governance, and privacy of the data. It's always so. First of all, DataSecOps, like I mentioned several times, is a new concept, and you're welcome to contact me to make progress in this and help, for example, create learning assets for data engineers to keep better security and such. I'll be happy to do that. Here's my contact details to the right. And now we have a bit of time for questions as well. But before that, if you want to read more, first of all, in blog.satoricyber.com, as well as in my Medium, you can find several resources like security guides for different data warehouses and specific security guides and more complete around around a certain data store. And I'm also working on a dedicated resource around DataSecOps with assets and learning materials and such. And of course, feel free to read my book that's coming up next month. Sorry, because I kind of we don't have a lot of time for questions, but if we have, but of course, feel free to reach out.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. Amazing talk. Interesting to listen to. We don't have any questions from the crowd, but I would love to ask some. So for me, a bit more to understand, if I'm more interested in the DataSecOps and I've been working with normal DevOps for a while or have it in a team, what is a good activity to get started to see, do I need DataSecOps? If I go to my development team now and throw that word in there, how would they react? How would they go about this?
I think that the best way to initiate this conversation in an organization is to start by an alliance with the security folks, and they resonate to them. These risks should resonate to them, like the fact that we are putting our hand in the sand and doing a data inventory once every year when there's an audit. Okay, so we pass the audit, maybe next time we will not, but we are putting ourselves in risk. And the fact that if, for example, if you're in data engineering and you are finding out that an increasing percentage of your time is just giving people access to data, you should not just accept it. You should find a way to make the process different, like enabling self-service data access, or find the ways of making it work, or automatic approval workflows, things like that, as an example. So include more teams, especially security.
So within the security teams, do you think a data security operations engineer is a kind of new position within a data infrastructure team, or is that something maybe more relevant in 1, 2, 3 years?
So I'm not sure about that. Like in some organizations, they have specialized DevSecOps engineer as a profession. I think that regardless of the title, the data engineering teams, and again, in some organizations there are data engineering teams, in some there are data ops teams, and regardless of the title, the concept needs to be there, right? So it doesn't matter if someone is called a DataSecOps engineer or a data engineer, but they need to have the mindset. That's the most important thing.
All right, good to learn, good to know. If you want to read up more on the data secure ops, Ben left a lot of resources in the slides as well. You'll find afterwards. For now, we are 1 minute over time. Ben, again, thank you for the talk. Interesting. And for everything else, I wish you a happy, great birthday and
Thank
looking
you.
forward to the next track.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
And we're offline.